If you Google how to write better sentences, you're going to get a ton of advice. Use strong verbs, vary sentence length, cut unnecessary words, and my personal favorite, avoid the passive voice. Now, a lot of this is technically true and good advice, and yet none of it approaches the actual fundamentals of writing good prose. All of this advice treats prose as something to be fixed, as something you can simply polish or repair, as though you can throw a bunch of words on the page, and as long as you go through a polishing stage, you now have good, clean prose. And now us editors are seeing this all the time, where writers will use AI assistants to write a manuscript or heavily rely on AI for styling and then want to preserve their voice or somehow insert their voice after the fact. But the reality is that you cannot fix or polish or clean up your prose into a resonant voice. And the reason is that that is not what prose is. Prose is the art of making decisions with words. If you don't make decisions, there's no you in the words. And if there's no you, there's no voice. So there are two key points that I want to address with this definition of prose. And the first one is that prose is an art. And because it's an art, it has all of the implications of art. And you as the artist also have all the responsibilities as an artist. And the second part of this definition is that it involves making choices. You have to make choices. You as the author make choices all the time as you're writing. And the more information that you can keep track of in your mind as you're writing, the more consciously you understand why you're making the choices that you make is going to make your prose stronger. Now, I want to be clear that the goal here is not to write a better first draft so that the polishing stage is easier. The goal is to make better choices. I like to think of prose as handwriting. If you don't actually write the words on the page, there's no way someone else can take those words and change them to make them look like your handwriting. Nobody's handwriting looks like someone else's, and no one can fake someone else's handwriting for very long. And that's because handwriting is the accumulation of thousands of tiny decisions made at speed below the level of conscious thought for years. You can't polish your handwriting into someone else's handwriting. And you can't clean up someone else's handwriting into your own. The decisions, the tiny decisions that you make as you're writing are what make your handwriting your handwriting. So what I want to do in this video is dive into the decisions that I made while writing a story and show you exactly how I made those decisions and the reasons that I made them. I want to dive into the art of making choices with words. And to do that, I'm going to do something that, as a perfectionist, truly terrifies me, and I'm going to show you one of my first drafts. And the reason I want to show you a first draft as opposed to a finished thing is that by the end of writing a story, I've made so many decisions that I can't even keep track of them anymore. I also want to be clear at the outset here that we're not going to get very far in the story in this video, but there will be a part 2 that goes deeper into it. So let's dive in and see what decisions I made and why I made them. What you're looking at here is something that terrifies many writers: the blank page, the first line. People put a ton of emphasis on the first line of a story because they want the first line to be special, because they want their story to be special. But let me challenge you for just one moment. Here's a first line. Nobody suspected the golden retriever until they discovered the offshore accounts. Now, this is a fine opening line if you actually want a story where dogs are at the heart of a pyramid scheme. Now, would you keep reading here? I certainly would. But a lot of people seem to think that the true test of an opening line is whether or not people will keep reading. But the reality is that readers will read through most opening lines to get to the second line. It's the second line that really matters. In a first line, there are no rules and the possibilities are endless. We can start with a sentence like this, but that freedom can often make things feel really daunting. In contrast, however, a second sentence now has to play by the rules of the first sentence. So imagine if we had this first line of our story, imagine having to write a sentence to follow that up. It's so much easier to write this sentence than it would be to write the second one after this. So unless you're truly ready to write a story where dogs take center stage, good luck. A great opening line or a flashy opening line that isn't true to your story is worse than a bland sentence that is. So what I want to show you here is what guides my decision making as I'm writing an opening line. So the question is, where do the rules for an opening line come from if there are no sentences before it to guide us? And the answer is the rules come from you. Or in this case, since I'm writing the story, they come from me. So as fun as this embezzling golden retriever idea sounds, I'm for now going to put it into the cut file. And I want to walk through some of the ideas and rules that I had in place when I started writing this particular story. Now, I believe you can start a story from anywhere. You could have an idea, you could have an image in your head, maybe you already know a character. But in this case, I had an idea. And my idea was, I have a retired Army vet, specifically a Vietnam vet. And this Vietnam vet had a mission. He wanted to supply housing for all unhoused vets in Los Angeles. So what does he do? He builds a barrack-style structure in Los Angeles that has space for hundreds of vets. I don't yet know about the practicality of all this. I don't know how much that would cost. I do know that the year is 2010, but this is just the germ of my idea. This is how I got to draft one. And not even draft one, this is how I got to sentence one. So what does this guy do since he has this mission? Well, he goes out and we'll call it recruits unhoused vets to join his program. He's essentially asking them to become part of a unit again. And his vision or his grand vision is that they will march as a unit through LA until policymakers take notice and he achieves change at the policy level. Now, this is a very rough idea, and there's already a few things that I'd really want to be careful for, but I just have a general idea of this character and what he wants. He's got a very ambitious idea of solving this major problem in 2010 Los Angeles. Now, where did this idea come from? I don't exactly know. I know that I'm a veteran of the Iraq War, and I've talked to a lot of Vietnam vets through the VA system, and especially when I was still in the Army, but there's no concrete moment where I can point to and say, this is where that idea came from. I also know that in the year 2010, there was a massive crisis with unhoused vets in Los Angeles. And another thing about this whole idea is that it's personal to me. I don't know exactly where it came from. I can't pinpoint a specific moment, but I do know that I feel that the way a country treats its veterans says a lot about that country. And so I have a very emotional response to this. So this story means something to me. Now, there's one more element here that I haven't talked about, and that is I generally gravitate towards speculative fiction. What if after all of this, what if this vet has this plan and he goes and he starts to enact this plan, but what if when this man goes out to recruit his first veteran, he inadvertently harvests the man's soul? Well, that took a crazy turn. I don't know exactly how I got here. I don't know why the story takes this turn, but I do know that it feels right to me. And this is purely intuitive, right? There's no logic here necessarily. This is just an amalgamation of a bunch of different things. I'm just feeling my way through what is meaningful to me. So now I have a list of things that I think is going to guide this story. I still don't know everything about the piece. I just know how it might begin. But if we consider what I've just done here, I've essentially created the beginnings of a list of rules that are going to be in place before my first sentence is even written. So let's look at some of these rules now. And this will guide our first sentence. So the first rule is we're in LA in 2010. Now this is actually very helpful. It is so much easier to start a story if you know when and where you are. We know that our point of view character is a Vietnam vet. We know that whatever he's doing, so whatever his character action is in the moment, is going to be related to his mission. Maybe he's going out to recruit the first person to join his potential unit. We also know that our point of view character believes strongly in his mission. He wouldn't set out to do all of this if he didn't care deeply. So this means he's got a deep desire. And then finally, I'm going to add one personal rule, and this is completely personal to me. This is just how I like my language to feel. I want my sentences to feel fresh. I like sentences that feel original and fun, and like I haven't read them before. If a phrase feels too familiar to me, I generally gravitate away from it. Again, totally personal. It's just something that I enjoy. It's what makes writing fun for me, is trying to think of new ways to say something. So now let's look at what we have. We have a list of rules that guides us in our first sentence. So one of the things I want to point out here is that we're not starting from a blank page. We have all of this to guide even just our first sentence. We don't know what's going to come after that first sentence. I don't know what the second sentence will be. I don't even know what the first sentence will be at this point. But I'm not operating from nothing. Now, you can operate from nothing. You don't need to start with any of this whatsoever. You can start with just writing a sentence and taking it from there. A lot of people do that. But what I am saying is that this process of decision making, thinking about all of this here, has to be done eventually. And this is a very fundamental point, is even if you started just writing, if you just started with one sentence and then wrote a second one and then a third and just kept going and had no idea, the point I really want to stress here is that even if you don't have any of this when you start out, eventually you do have to go through this decision-making process. You might do it on the second draft or the third or the fourth or whatever draft you do it on, but you do have to start thinking about these things at some point. Otherwise, nothing will have guided your decision-making in the earliest part of your story. You need to go through a decision-making process. Because I also want to point out that another huge benefit of having all of these things is that now this story has me in it. I'm going to be in the sentences. My ideas, my thoughts, my preferences, my knowledge, all of this is going to be in the story starting from sentence 1 because it's going to be guiding my decision-making process. So even if you started a random story by saying something like, I like food, and then now you try to think of a second sentence, well, at some point you're going to have to come back to, well, why did I write I like food, right? How did I get there to begin with? And again, it could happen on a second draft or a third draft, but if you don't do any of this decision-making process throughout the entire time of writing your piece, then you're not going to be in the story. And another thing I want to point out here is that none of these rules are random. They all come from me. They might be somewhat arbitrary, like I want my sentences to feel fresh is purely just because that's what I want, right? There's no other reason beyond that. I just enjoy fresh feeling sentences, original sentences. I just find that fun. But none of these are arbitrary. Arbitrary rules lead to apathetic fiction. Meaningful rules, and when I say meaningful, I mean rules that have meaning for you personally and specifically. Meaningful rules lead to writing fiction with intention. Notice this. If I start out my story saying my point of view character must believe strongly in the mission that he's going for, I'm going to write with intention. I know that this is going to happen in the story. Okay, so now we've done a whole bunch of thinking and we haven't even written our first line. But I want to point out that this is what gives writing depth. The depth of your prose comes from all the reasons that you made the decisions to write things the way you did. And a lot of those reasons are going to be unconscious or subconscious, or you're not going to know exactly why they exist in the first place. I don't know why all of this came out the way it did, but I do know that it's very personal to me and that it's meaningful to me. So again, the depth comes from the why. It comes from why you are writing the way that you're writing. Why are you making the decisions that you make? Because other people wouldn't make the same decisions. I pretty much guarantee you, no one else is going to sit down to write a story and have all of these same rules and all of these same ideas. It's just not going to happen. They're too personal. Because again, prose is the art of making decisions with words. So I really hope this was useful to you. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. But other than that, I will see you in part 2.